Let's get started. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. My name is Ahmet Tekelioglu. I'm the Executive Director at CAIR-Philadelphia. And we have Christine Mohamed, our wonderful Executive Director of CAIR-Pittsburgh, and Adam Attia, who is the Legal Director at CAIR-Philadelphia. Our attorney and members of our legal team are also on the call. Together, CAIR-Philadelphia and CAIR-Pittsburgh make CAIR-Pennsylvania. And Alhamdulillah, as many of you know, we serve all of our state, and we are going to start this call by first, I'll invite Christine to give us a little bit of grounding from CAIR-Pittsburgh. What are some of the trends that she is seeing on CAIR-Pittsburgh side? And then I'll talk a little bit as well. And from there on, we are going to move forward. Let me just make sure that our slide deck is also showing properly for all of you. I think this is hopefully going to work. If someone can give me a heads up that the screen sharing is working as it should, I would appreciate it. Is it? Are we good? All right, thank you, Mr. Christine. I'm also going to make a co-host just in case, you never know. And I'm gonna spotlight Sir Christine for everyone, so that Sir Christine can jump in with our first portion. Of course, CAIR's mission is to enhance understanding of Islam, protect civil rights, promote justice, and empower American Muslims. We have the vision to be a leading advocate for justice and mutual understanding as an organization. We will remind this to you later, but we are also noting that this presentation is not legal advice, right? So there isn't attorney-client privilege on this call. So that's an important reminder, right? So while Adam can answer questions in broad strokes, we are also asking you to not maybe put things in so specifics if you're asking questions down the line, but rather maybe put it in hypotheticals, if that makes sense. But we are going to come to some of this content later on. But for now, Sir Christine, the floor is yours for a quick update from Pittsburgh, and then I'll jump in with some sharing of our concerns and what we are seeing on the ground on the Philadelphia side and some of our work. And I will go to Brother Adam, inshallah.
Sure. Assalamu alaikum, everybody. Thank you for attending this webinar. We thought it was very important as tensions are currently rising. Here in Pittsburgh, there have been community members calling with basic concerns. What do I do if ICE stops me? What do I do if they come to my house? And though most people do know their basic rights, it's always good to stay informed on that matter. We're working close with other grassroots organizations to get the overall feel of what's happening on the ground. We have seen an increase of ICE activity across the whole entire Allegheny County area. And so being here at CAIR-Pittsburgh, if you are struggling, if you have questions, if there's an incident or something that you're unsure of, please reach out to me and I'll be happy to help you. Also on CAIR-Pittsburgh's website, we have our ICE toolkits, which has tons of different information, how to be prepared, how to be an advocate for others. And on that platform, you are able to change the language to many different languages. So please share it, get yourself familiar with it, because learning that information, practicing that information is what's really going to help you in the moments of crisis. Another thing that we've been doing here, been reaching out to local school districts to discuss bullying being increased over the tensions lately that have happened, where students are feeling targeted, feeling bullied, just feel the overall Islamophobic remarks and things from the media kind of trickling its way into everyday life. So we are reaching out to schools, and we do have a couple trainings that we will be doing. We're still doing the Y Power program, which is helping to teach our youth how to do public speaking, gain confidence, and empower them, especially now when, things are tight, tensions are high. Sometimes you have to speak up for yourself. So we will continue to do that, and then just be out in the community, trying to help our community stay strong and our vulnerable communities, building closer and tighter relationships with them. And I won't take anybody else's time, but I'd rather Ahmet.
Thank you so much, Sir Christine. Truly appreciate that. Similarly, what I can share from the Philly side is that, sorry, by the way, I don't know why okay. What I want to share is similar, right? So our work is ongoing, and we'll hear from Adam about some of the legal intakes that we are seeing. In Philadelphia, our numbers are already almost exceeding the last year, right? So we are not seeing in the aftermath of the genocide and a decrease. There is definitely the impact of this administration, and I think we are very much aware of the moment that we are in. Similarly, in Philadelphia, community organizations, organizing networks, allied organizations, we are collaborating closely both with legal and immigrant organizing and broader community organizing collectives in trying to think about what are our communal steps, if and when, and most likely a question of when, more ICE and National Guard and as such presence takes place. We don't want to be alarmist, but at the same time, we are prepared. We know that comes with a lot of real on the ground consequences for our communities. We are actively responding to also the space of what is the role of our Muslim American community in these spaces? How can our communities, our masajid, our community organizations show up, and how can we be a vehicle to facilitate that? We are also seeing, especially in portions of the broader Philadelphia area, from Allentown to North Bend to Northeast Philadelphia and Southwest Philadelphia, real life consequences for our communities. We are definitely also feeling the heat of some of the nationwide developments, right? And Adam will touch later in this presentation on what does the ICE's sensitive locations policy being rescinded mean for our masjid, for our Islamic schools, for our spaces. So this is impacting our broader swaths of our community, and there is a lively discussion around next steps as well. On this side, right? So even though we are not doing direct immigration legal work, we have been connecting our community members with immigration attorneys, and we have a specific fund through which we are able to cover some of the costs as well, which has been helpful to many international students who have been faced with different challenges, as well as other community members, right? So just I wanted to share the story of a community member the other day who reached out saying they received an email from the consulate through which they received an H-1B visa, and that they were trying to figure out what to do, and that they were not able to get connected with immigration attorneys because everybody is so really buried under that legal work. And we were able to connect them with a Muslim attorney on a quicker basis, and that they are at least having that conversation and are more informed. But at the same time, I think in realization of this moment for our communities, right? So on the one hand, the impact of the ongoing genocide and the civil rights impact that it has, here from school settings to workplace settings to other places. On top of that, the federal administration's ongoing policies. Just today, as you may have read in the news, 5 additional countries have been added, additional restrictions have been brought to Palestinians who carry Palestinian IDs through the Palestinian Authority, and several other steps have been taken, right? So this collective sort of punishment and vilification of our communities is ongoing. So we are very much aware and responding together and in alliance with our communities. One other thing is that we are also having conversations with law enforcement agencies as well, and we are seeing an interest in more specific targeting of certain segments of our communities, like in Afghan American communities and others. And once again, we keep reminding our community that at CAIR we have this motto of reminding our community to not invite FBI in for chai, right? So which stands also for not speaking to law enforcement agencies without legal representation. And that's, I think, message we will keep reminding, right? So that needs to be our North Star and a value that we have. And alhamdulillah, our legal team has been able to assist already several community members in that regard, and community leaders, right? So this is not about someone having something to hide or whatnot. This is about us asserting our legal rights and making sure that our communities are protected. As always, we remind our communities that law enforcement agencies are allowed to lie and to take steps, whereas our community members should have legal representation such that they do not face consequences down the line. Unfortunately, there's so many stories of tragedies that have happened just because someone had the good intentions, but unfortunately not the right policy. So with that, I mean, even though this is not the space, there are also community leadership level conversations, right, that are being held in terms of showing up in more strongly for our communities as well. So we want to be also real about that, and hopefully some of those conversations will take place in different spaces too. But with that, and again, reminding everyone that the legal part will come in, and Adam, I'm gonna pass to you. Our team has brought in a quick sort of initial update on the most recent USCIS memo, and today's additional news came in, of course. But this perhaps will come in, but Adam, I'm gonna pass to you. We are gonna create space for questions down the line. For now, if you have any especially accessibility needs and such, please feel free to put those in the chat, and we are also going to create space for questions at the end. Thank you so much, and Adam, over to you.
Assalamu alaikum, everybody. Thank you for joining this evening. Yeah, just going to go into the presentation. I'll start with this December 2nd, 2025 memo, right? Following the November 26th shooting in DC that was linked to an Afghan parolee, USCIS has implemented new measures like drastically reducing, drastically changing the asylum process. So for the Afghan community, if they entered under Operation Allies Welcome, their humanitarian parole remains valid, but they have no permanent status and should not travel internationally. You may expect delays or freezing of adjustment of status, I-485 processing. Special immigrant visas are exempt from the entry ban, but not from USCIS's enhanced vetting. Now, for all asylum applications, the government's saying that they're pretty much going to put everything on hold. People who have already received immigration benefits, the government is saying that they're going to review those. They're not saying specifically from exactly, or sorry, it does have a list of specifically 19 countries where there will be a comprehensive re-review of approved benefit requests since January 20th, 2021. So people who've had asylum approvals, refugee adjustments, green cards, work permits, all of these things theoretically could be reviewed by USCIS. So what does this mean in practice, right? Delays or freezes. Many pending applications will be delayed, possibly indefinitely, while USCIS conducts their reviews. Uncertainty for approved immigrants, right? People who've already been approved, who've done this process, who've, given the government all the information that has already been requested, right? They think that they're safe now, except the government is going to re-review, these benefits from specific countries. This will create an increased backlog and create, legal limbo for people who are waiting for their asylum applications to be processed. And this memo, it does mark a substantial shift. Rather than just restricting new immigration or visas, the government is retroactively revisiting previously approved immigration benefits, which has rarely been done at this scale in U.S. history. For many immigrants and asylum seekers, this creates a climate of uncertainty where legal status could be delayed or jeopardized, even after years of living in the U.S. and after being approved for asylum, right? So this is a drastic departure. I think this type of memo is something that I think in the legal community and the activist community are not entirely surprised that the Trump administration is going this route, right? They've wanted to limit immigration. They're kind of using this as an opportunity to do so. So know your rights in general, right? What we want to do is learn our rights ahead of time and prepare an emergency plan, for when things go wrong or for when law enforcement shows up. Do not speak to any member of law enforcement without a lawyer. That's your constitutional right. So exert it, right? And we'll get into this later, but you don't have a right to lie to law enforcement. But you do have a right to have representation when you interact with law enforcement. So, exercise that. And reach out to us or any other attorneys for legal assistance, right? If you are contacted by law enforcement, whether you reach out to us or a different attorney or different law firm, different organization, just make sure that there's an extra set of eyes when you are meeting. So what are civil rights, right? They're legal protections for all people, regardless of their immigration status, contrary to what people in the media or what's going around on X. Our civil rights, they prevent discrimination based off of race, national origin, religion, and other characteristics such as sex, gender. And these are rights that are guaranteed by the U.S. Constitution and by the laws of, the U.S. government and by various states, right? The states pretty much all have their anti-discrimination laws as well. Additionally, like with that, the Civil Rights Act codifies, what is discrimination and really limits or provides an avenue for us to address discrimination. So civil rights basics, right? First Amendment is important to our community, right? We have freedom of religion. It prevents the government from establishing a national religion or favoring one religion over another, but it also ensures that individuals can practice their religion freely without government interference. So as long as you're not breaking the laws of the land, you're allowed to practice your religion. You have the right, with free speech, you have the right to express yourself freely, whether through speech, writing, or other forms of expression without, being punished by the government. This includes the right to criticize the government, share ideas, and participate in public debates. Now, something that I think the community as a whole should be more aware of is that freedom of speech really specifically applies to government actors. So if your employer is the government, right, could be the federal government, could be the state government, school districts, they're local government entities, right? If you're employed by the government, they can't, discipline you because of your speech. If you're employed by a private entity, which most individuals are, they theoretically can limit your freedom of speech. So there is, and that also applies with public and private universities. Public universities have to give students more freedom of speech. Private universities can limit it. Now, the Fourth Amendment, right? That prevents the government from intruding upon your person, home, business, and property without either a valid search warrant, a valid arrest warrant, or a belief rising to the level of probable cause, right? So if law enforcement shows up, they need a search warrant, an arrest warrant, or probable cause in order to enter your house. That's what the Fourth Amendment guarantees. So if law enforcement comes to your house, our recommendation is to make sure they have one of these things, right? Make sure they have a warrant. If they don't have a warrant, don't let them into your house. Um, if if law enforcement is asking you if they can come into your house, they don't have a warrant. They're asking for your permission. So our recommendation is to not say yes in those situations. The Fourth Amendment is the basis for like stop and frisk laws, safety inspections, wiretaps, and surveillance, right? Where there are certain procedures and protocols that the government has to go through in order to search people's phone records, to wiretap and things like that. All right. Now, knowing your rights, encountering law enforcement. So law enforcement, right? There's different levels of law enforcement. You have local law enforcement, right? The Philadelphia Police Department, Lower Merion, Westchester, West Goshen. Those are local law enforcement. Then you have the state law enforcement, right? The state police, state troopers. And then there's federal law enforcement, right? Mostly we know FBI, but ICE, right? It's federal law enforcement, the DEA, ATF, the three-letter agencies, right? So these rules generally apply to law enforcement across the board, whether it's local, state, or federal. So, right, during law enforcement, they try to gather information. They want to get your consent to do things that you do not have to agree to. They term this cooperation, and this cooperation saves them time and effort, but it may come at the expense of your rights. Law enforcement can approach you at any time and place. Like they'll sometimes show up to your house. They'll sometimes, catch you walking down the street. Maybe show up to your work. Right? These are some of the reasons that they might give, their outreach to the Muslim community, or, we just have some routine questions. We're doing an investigation on someone else. Can we ask you a few questions? Or we really need your help on this issue. Your name came up during the course of an investigation. You're not in any trouble. Usually, right, you're not in any trouble. They try to disarm you. But these are the type of things that law enforcement will do. And whether it's malicious or not malicious, right, it probably depends on the individual officer and how they're going about it. But at the end of the day, right, they're trying to fact find. They're trying to gather information. So this is how they're going to do it. They're going to reach out. They're not going to come yelling at you if they want you to provide them information, right? So Ahmet, can you go to the next one? All right. So you do not have to permit law enforcement into your home or office if they do not have a warrant. And the warrant needs to be signed by a judge. Now something with that, like you should never lie or provide false information to any law enforcement officer, as that is illegal and you can get in trouble for that. Not talking, not providing information is not illegal. So having representation is not illegal, right? Lying or providing false information is. When you're interacting with law enforcement, get the name, agency, telephone number of any officer that is, questioning you or meeting with you. You can be held for questioning for a specific reason. Now, with that, ask, am I under arrest? Am I being detained? If they say, yes, you are under arrest, then immediately say, I want an attorney. If no, you're not being detained, then ask, am I free to leave? And you should be free to leave. Now, if law enforcement does stop you, you do have to identify yourself. That doesn't necessarily mean that you have to provide an ID, but you do have to identify yourself. So theoretically, there have been situations where they could take someone to the police station, just to figure out identification. But that's like the limited circumstance where they can just take an individual without, a valid search warrant or without probable cause. Now, generally, right? So if police or ICE asks about your immigration status, you have the right to remain silent and do not have to discuss your immigration or citizen status with them. You don't have to answer questions about where you were born, whether you're a U.S. citizen, or how you entered the country. Now, this is separate for, ports of entry and international borders. But generally, right, if you're just out here in Philadelphia going about your day and law enforcement encounters you and starts asking you these questions, you do not have to answer. If you're not a U.S. citizen and an immigration agent requests your immigration papers, you must show them if you have them with you. If you're over 18, the recommendation is to carry your immigration documents with you. Now, if you do not have immigration papers, say you want to remain silent, right? You don't have to disclose anything like that to law enforcement. Now, another key thing, though, is do not lie about your citizenship status or provide fake documents or provide a fake social security number, because then that's criminal. And the consequences that you're facing become more severe. So when ICE is at your door, if officers are at your door, keep the door closed and ask if they are immigration agents or from ICE. Ask the agents what they are there for. Opening the door does not automatically give agents the right to enter your home, but it's so much safer to speak through the door. Don't open the door. There have been situations where when you open the door, law enforcement, they see something in the background, or they say they see something, right? Something flashy. They thought it was a weapon, and then they're coming in. So the recommendation is just to not open the door. If they do have a warrant, ask them to slide it underneath the door. Now, if they have a warrant, they're not going to be asking you for permission to come in. They're going to say, we have a warrant, we're coming in. Either open the door or we're going to kick it down. If they don't have a warrant, that's when they're really trying to convince you to just let them in, right? No big deal. You're not in trouble. We just want to ask a few questions, things like that. If the agents don't speak your language, ask for an interpreter, right? That's very important. So, right, they show up to your door, ask them if they have a warrant signed by a judge. Most of the time, ICE does not have a warrant signed by a judge. They'll have a warrant of removal or warrant of deportation, which is a DHS issued warrant that says this individual can be removed or deported, but it does not give law enforcement the right to enter into someone's private home to arrest that individual for deportation. They can arrest an individual walking down the street, walking at the mall, driving to work, things like that. But that a warrant of removal does not give law enforcement the right to enter your home without your permission. If they say they have a warrant, right, ask them to slip the warrant under the door. And then when you have it, make sure that it actually is a judicial warrant, not a DHS warrant, one signed by a U.S. judge, U.S. or state judge. So this right here, right, is an example of a search warrant that is signed by a judge. It says search warrant up here, has the name, location, and then down at the bottom, it is signed by a judicial officer. Read the warrant. Law enforcement in the past have just held up a piece of paper and said, oh, we have a warrant, and people just let them in when nothing on that, it wasn't a warrant. It was just a piece of paper, right? Sometimes they'll hold up an old warrant for somebody else entirely. Make sure the name matches. If it's not your name, just tell them it's the wrong name, wrong person. Don't let them in. Now, something that's very important is if law enforcement comes to your house and they don't have a warrant and they just come in, do not physically resist, right? Any legal challenges can be done on the back end. But if you physically resist or physically fight an officer, then you're facing charges that, um, you're facing criminal charges at that point, which didn't have to happen. So if they enter illegally, you can challenge that on the back end. Everything that they find from an illegal search gets thrown out. Everything that comes from what they find in an illegal search gets thrown out. So, right, if you see them break the law, like, oh, they're coming in, just sit there and think, okay, well, this isn't great in the moment, but just know that you can fight this and that anything that they find, they can't use right against you. Now, this right here is an Immigration and Customs Enforcement warrant of removal deportation, right? It says down here, it's the signature of an INS official, the field office director of Dallas, Texas, right? So DHS, within DHS, right? They're like the judge, jury, prosecutor, right? Everything. And they're saying, oh, this is a warrant for removal. So they can use this to deport someone, but they can't enter someone's house to get them to deport them. They can arrest them on the street. Will touch theoretically, before there was a policy memo, right, where DHS wouldn't enforce immigration activities at hospitals, churches, mosques, parades, funerals, weddings, and things like that. Trump rescinded that memo. So now, theoretically, they're saying ICE could, conduct immigration arrests and activities at these locations. ICE can go to hospitals to arrest individuals. They can go to schools. They can go to houses of worship. So, right, there's ways to try to push back with that. But generally, right, ICE almost never has a judicial warrant. They have the warrants of removal, but they almost never have a judicial warrant. So they either need the warrant or your consent. So if they don't have a warrant, which they mostly don't, and you don't give them consent, they can't enter your house, right? If you open the door and let them in, then they can come into your house. Right, the sensitive locations policy has been rescinded. So theoretically, right, public spaces, right, the masjid, and then that's something that's, I think, hard for our community, or this is a tough subject for our community to grapple with, right? Masjids, we consider them public places, as in anybody can come and pray when it's time for prayer. But they're not public places, and like as a mall would be a public place where they're open, right, for the general public to just come in at any time. Also with that though, right, a Muslim community, yeah, you generally know everybody in the community, but alhamdulillah, like our community gets bigger every day, more people join the faith, people move, right? So as someone new shows up, we aren't usually in turning people away from the masjid, right? They're generally public spaces. That's how we operate. So the government now is saying those are public spaces, we can come to them. Our recommendation is to put up, signs that say like, this is not a public space, or, this is private space, ICE agents or, law enforcement, it's not permitted, or saying that this is public for Muslim prayer only, right? There's different ways you can use signage, whether the sign really holds up or not, that will still be hashed out in the courts. But the big thing with law enforcement is that they can be in public spaces. They can make arrests in public spaces without warrants. So with the masjid, right, there's creative ways to think about how some places can be public spaces of the masjid and some places can be private, right? The imam's office, anything locked, that's a private space. They would need a warrant to get into that part of the masjid. Schools, right? If they're like, separated off somehow, or like there's a hallway that's closed off, to the rest of the masjid, they would need a separate warrant to access those locations. But this is something that we are, I think, just waiting until this happens, where ICE does like raid a masjid in order to arrest somebody. Now, to my knowledge, to my knowledge, it hasn't happened at a masjid yet, but I could be mistaken. But I do recall reading recently that there has been an uptick at religious institutions. So it's definitely something that could impact our community, right? ICE agents, I know we're skipping around different things, but like ICE agents, uh, they don't really play fair. I think a lot of the community, we think law enforcement probably doesn't play fair in general. I think that's a fair assessment. Um, but ICE specifically, right? They're using unmarked cars. They're wearing jeans and a hoodie. Like people who are being arrested by ICE at times feel like they're like actually being like kidnapped by like gangs or of people, right? Like there's people that are not identifying themselves and anything like that. They're not even wearing like uniforms. Now in some situations they are. But it's definitely a scary time. Um, sorry, lost my train of thought with that. I don't know. So apologize for that. Um, but that's generally how to interact with law enforcement, right? You have the right to remain silent. Um, always have an attorney with you when you interact with law enforcement, right? And law enforcement have told that to us, right? They're like, yeah, some people have said like, yeah, that's smart, right? When individual agents are in a room with somebody, right? If there's an attorney in there, they're gonna play by the rules, right? They're going to do um, what the law requires them. And that's all, right? All these know your rights things and things like that. All we're asking is for the police to follow the law and for us to exert our rights to the max, right? And that's all we want, like across the board. Um, so now as a traveler, right? US citizens cannot be denied entry back into the United States. Um, but you can be stopped, you can be detained, you can be questioned, and the government can say you're not going to fly back. Um, but at the end of the day, they have to allow US citizens to return into the country. Um, for non-US citizens, right? Ultimately, it's the Customs and Border Protection Officer. Um, when you come in, who's reviewing your stuff, they ultimately, like the person sitting behind the kiosk, ultimately has to say whether you can be allowed into the country or not into the country. Now that doesn't apply to US citizens, but it does apply to visa holders. Customs and Border Protection can seize electronic devices. If you're a US citizen, you do not have to willingly just hand over your phone and open it for them, right? They'll ask, oh, can we look at your phone? Our recommendation for US citizens is to say no. Then they'll say, okay, we're going to confiscate your phone. Well, at that point, if they want to confiscate it, then they have the legal right to confiscate electronics. So they can confiscate it. Our recommendation is never to open it, never give them your password. And if they want to take it, let them take it. And they'll look at it when you're gone, they'll send it back to you, right? You request, like an inventory receipt of what they took. It'll be signed, by the government saying that they have it, and you'll receive it a few days later, a week later. Now, our recommendation is to let them confiscate it because even with that, they do need supervisory approval in order to search confiscated devices. So there still is an extra hurdle that it has to go through on the back end. And we don't know exactly what they find when they search, what they have access to, right? We can only assume that they have access to everything, but we don't know exactly. Sometimes you'll get the phone back and you see exactly what keywords they're looking in your phone, right? Seeing if you mention any hot buzzwords of the day of what they're looking for. Um, but they can take, right, your electronic devices. Now, if you're not a US citizen and they say open up, your phone, you have, did I freeze or no? Okay, I'm sorry. if you're not a U.S. citizen, they ask you to open your phone, right? You have to open your phone, go through it with them there, right? For U.S. citizens, what we're seeing right now, unfortunately, with U.S. citizens is that because a lot of U.S. citizens are like, too, we don't have anything to hide in this moment. Like, we don't, with travel coming back, like, we're not risking not being admitted to the United States or anything like that. So there's not that pressure. They're like, oh, we have nothing to hide. When law enforcement there is asking them questions, a lot of people have been going along with it. And all of a sudden, law enforcement spending 6 hours asking them questions. And um, like, I don't know if this is factually accurate across the board, but anecdotally, what we're seeing is, right, like law enforcement, Customs and Border Protection, they don't have all the resources for interpreters. They're using Google Translate. So people who don't speak English, agents are asking them questions for a little while and then getting frustrated and then moving on. But the US citizens who are speaking fluent English, they keep, you know, asking them questions and then getting them on this tangent and then going there, then taking their phone and going back for a couple hours, then coming and asking them additional questions, right? We feel like never get into that situation. Because then too, you're put in the spot where like you have to think on your feet how you want to be answering law enforcement. You just traveled, you're nervous, right? There's no winning with that. We think lots of times like, oh, if we cooperate, they'll just make like they won't come at us or they won't make life more difficult for us. That's not necessarily their goal, right? Their goal is to gather information, make arrests, things like that. So now this is something law enforcement cannot perform stops or searches based solely on your race, religion, national origin, ethnicity, or sex. Now I feel like any Muslim who travels, would kind of think this is not true. And anecdotally, it's not true. But they can't say, oh, we're stopping you because you're Muslim. But, they'll say, oh, we're stopping because of this name or where you travel to and things like that, which, essentially have to do with being Muslim. Oh, is that it? Do we jump around? Sorry.
And there are a number of questions. Maybe there is like some others, and I can pull that in the meantime. But should we maybe try to answer some of the questions in the meantime because there's quite a few in the chat and in the Q&A. Would that work?
Yes, inshallah.
Okay. So there are a number of questions, and I'll try to bring some of them to the fourth. There is a question around like whether I think this is going to the beginning, whether previously issued green cards could be revoked under the new policies or not.
It's my understanding that theoretically, yes. Right? I haven't seen that happen, but I think theoretically that's a concern.
Yeah, thank you. There is a question around the question asks, is it true that a judge that overrules what the USCIS says or does, such as awarding citizenship and naturalizing individuals whose oath ceremony has been canceled in recent events? I think that was a ruling, but I think that's something that we need to double check. I think the question is, we know that there have been individuals who were scheduled for all ceremonies, and right before the ceremonies, they were told because you fall under the new countries, you cannot proceed with the oath ceremony. And the question is asking, is it true that a judge overruled that? I'm not positive about that. I don't know if you have that information or not.
I don't know. No, I don't know.
All right. Thank you. But that's something that we can look into. Now, there's a number of other questions as well. I think the last one Like, what would be things that are impacting naturalized U.S. citizens? Could that also be revoked, like green cards um, um, being revoked as well?
Um, can they revoke previously issued green cards?
No, I think this question is like we understand maybe previously issued green cards could be under consideration. It's asking whether this also applies to naturalized U.S. citizens. Um, could a naturalized U.S. citizen lose their citizenship status theoretically or not?
Um, uh, I mean, I think based off of the memo, theoretically, yes, right? Because they're trying to re-examine, immigration benefits that were already, um, granted, which, citizenship would be. So, I mean, theoretically, yes. And if they, right, re-review all these different things, right? If someone, came under asylum and then that they became a naturalized citizen later on, maybe, they might say, oh, well, we re-examined and there was fraud, and that would, be reason to not. So I do think there is that risk.
Yeah,
Um,
and I think theoretically there is some precedent, however, very few in the past that citizenship has been revoked and as such, but it's been very limited. But of course, currently, I don't think this is so much there, but possibly it's there. There's a question around whether they are trying to take away dual citizenship. There is a proposal by a lawmaker. We don't currently see any legs to it, whether dual citizenship would be removed or not. So I think that's something that we can like keep for now. There's a question around the airports and especially the tools. Sorry, like the electronics. How would one go about requesting an inventory of what was searched?
so you won't get an inventory of what was searched. They won't tell you that. Or my understanding that they won't tell you what was searched. Now, like, right, what we've seen is like when people open up their WhatsApp app, right, and they look at the top or something, or like recent searches, like you can see what they're searching in your phone. Um, but yeah, we won't know exactly what. So, right, have the assumption that like whatever's on your phone, the government could see. And right, I think
Mhm.
that's also something to consider when you are, right, say your phone gets taken, government seized it, searched it, didn't search it, you don't know. Later on, though, right, you're traveling and maybe you answer a question that contradicts something that was in your phone, right? Could they have that information? Theoretically, they could. Um, so something to consider, I think, generally, like if they do have your phone, like what information could the government have? Um, I don't know, Ahmed, what's your thing about the billboard?
Yeah, I think like so Zehra Bilo from our San Francisco Bay Area office, right? So like reminds us and everyone that's look, you should be prepared if something is on your phone that it could be on a billboard on I-95, on 476, whatever highway that you are using, right? So like, I think we should be clear about not having like, full on digital security and that anything on our phones could be accessed. And of course, like, another reminder that you should also never have Face ID on your phones, especially while traveling, because that's an interesting way that law enforcement could force it on you. Um,
So,
one,
okay,
uh
I'm sorry. No,
yeah,
no.
please go ahead.
They were saying the follow-up question is, so should someone just travel with a burner phone at this point? Um, yeah, right. That's what, like, in the business world, I know people have brought up a point before where, like, when they would travel to China, right, it was just easier to just have a burner phone. A phone, not a burner phone as in like you're doing something illegal, but a phone that doesn't have all your everything about your personal life and history on there, right? People used to make those considerations like traveling to China. Businessmen just it would cause less questions, right? Less headache, less issues. So now that's, what basically a recommendation, to travel back home to the United States, right? Is having a burner phone. Something that doesn't have every single picture you've ever like had in your life, right? Or every contact you've ever messaged or anything like that. Or, I, I also don't want people to be paranoid, but like the government is, searching these things. They are trying to look at people's social media, right? Now I think they're saying they want like all of your social media from the past 5 years or like all your posts or something like that, right? It's like becoming kind of crazy. So, right, don't go down that rabbit hole. Don't be in those situations with law enforcement where you have to like answer, oh, well, what were you doing at this protest? And, right? If
Yeah.
you don't have a phone that has all that stuff, they can't answer it, ask you about it, and then if you don't willingly open your phone, right, they'll have to confiscate it, and they still can't ask you because you'll be at home and they'll be looking through your phone, right? Um,
Yeah. Thank you. And there's a question around like, we are talking about like travel, but like maybe going back to other law enforcement practices and FBI and as such. A question is around what about entrapment by law enforcement? What are some tactics that they might use? What are signs to look out for? How does that come as a concern for the Muslim American community?
right. No, that's a good question. And I think, right, it's some of the same stuff that we encountered post 9/11. And I think it's some of the same considerations about when we think about whether masjids are public spaces, private spaces, and things like that, right? Um, if an individual who you've never seen before comes to the masjid, right, at right now, people's minds, whether in the back of their mind or something, is this law enforcement? Is it someone trying to get information about the community? Is it ICE, scoping out the community? And those are, real concerns. Um, Now, what are like ways to avoid it? I think is being right vigilant, right? If like, I think with entrapment, lots of times law enforcement are the ones who are, you know, trying to like convince people like over the edge of like the point of no return. Um, so if individuals are new to the community, you know, using rhetoric that, other people aren't using or that seems a little alarming, right? These are all things I think to look out for. But that doesn't mean that those individuals are law enforcement too, right? There is no like clear-cut solution and to like deal with this. I think as a community, right, we do have to work together, um, be vigilant. If people are saying things, right, that um people are saying rhetoric, right, that like is alarming, right? I think we need to be vigilant. Um, Lots of times, right, contact care in situations too with law enforcement, like they do try to sneak like into the Muslim community and get information. Sometimes contacting them and being like, hey, cut it off or cut it out, right? They stop. They're like, okay, whatever, they know. Um, so that's an option. Um, but I do think, right, it's about protecting also like each individual has to protect themselves. I I think it goes to what Ahmed was saying too about the billboard, right? Like anything in your phone. Um, I think having like physical, like the last few years, the last few years have been intense. They've been tough, right? Um, and like emotions are running high. But it just like be smart with what's posted, with what's said. I do think when people are using rhetoric that is alarming, right? Contact the imam, um, contact masjid leadership, right? Those individuals have a better like understanding of the community and they can work with us and other organizations. But there is no like one just solution. It's but it is very like reminiscent of the 9/11 post 9/11 era, right? Where like law enforcement is trying to infiltrate the community, right? And since, right, the November 26th shooting, right, law enforcement has been reaching out to a lot of masjids, to a lot of people in the Muslim community, especially the Afghan community, right? Um, whether, you know, or whatever they're doing, I don't know. I don't know if they're planning on going around to arrest everybody, right? But what they are doing seems to be like trying to come up with some type of like surveillance or um accounting for like everybody and who's going through issues, not going through issues, things like that. That really seems to be um what they seem to be harping on right now.
Yeah. Thank you. I think like one thing to add to this is that, of course, like, one impact of this has been that unfortunately, right, so especially after 9/11, we have seen this, maybe today we are seeing it, right? So it also carried a negative impact on like new people moving newly to an area or like converts, like, there was this kind of aura of suspicion. And of course, like, we also have as Muslims, right, so need to continue to be welcoming and not have that sort of suizan or suspicion. And it's a matter of how we structure our communities and while keep them welcoming at the same time, be careful around these kind of like, harmful tactics as well. So imams among us, will have better advice around that as well. But with that, there's a question, I think, like, this is but like, overall reminder about like, law enforcement's engagements. The question is, if a federal agent such as the FBI or ICE comes and approaches you for the purpose of asking you general questions, then are you not required to answer their questions? Like, you're okay to say, I can't talk to you now. I'm happy to talk to you with my attorney. What would be the best advice in terms of how to conduct that conversation
Yeah.
practically?
So, if law enforcement, right? So yeah, we were talking a lot like if they show up to your house, but you're walking down the street too, someone comes up or like you're at the mall, someone comes up and starts talking. Yeah, no, you don't have to answer their questions there. And as soon as like they identify themselves as law enforcement, our thing is like, yeah, I'd be glad, or not, you don't have to say I'd be glad. You just say like I can meet with you, but I will, meet with you with my attorney present. Leave your card, and my attorney will contact you time, to schedule a time that would work for everybody. I think just right, and they do like sometimes they'll just like show like you're walking on the side of the road and they'll just like walk up and like show you a picture like, hey, do you know this person? And it's like, no. Then the next person they show, oh well, what about this? And like might be your like mom or something, right? um they do just like try to catch you off guard, maybe not inside your house because right, they have to go through more hurdles in order to get inside your house, but once you're outside of your house in public, they can kind of use any tactics to get information out of you. They can lie to you. Like law enforcement can lie to you. You cannot lie to them, right? Um, it's not fair, but that's how it is. So that's why exerting your rights is important. Um, you know, and just like an example, right? They might be talking, oh, when was the last time, you visited Egypt? You think it's 2001, but it was actually like January or February 2022, right? Without an attorney there, at some point they might be like, they could like put pressure and say like, well, why are you lying to us? You said the last time you were there was 2021. This says 2022. And it might seem like a minor mistake, but once federal law enforcement, agents are like putting the pressure on you and trying to intimidate you, it can be scary. They're not going to do that with an attorney in the room, right? Over something that's like nonsense like that, trying to trip you up. But without an attorney, they definitely will, or not that they definitely will, but they definitely could do that and have done that. Not every agent is going to go rogue, right? But some agents will. The FBI themselves has said, like, yeah, it's good practice to have your attorneys with us. Even, some people sometimes like will reach out to the FBI on behalf of a community member because the community member keeps, the FBI keeps contacting them, or wants them to be an informant or something, right? And it's like, okay, let's set up a time where we can go meet with the FBI, answer whatever questions they have, and lots of times that's been the end of that. I do think them knowing that somebody else is watching is, very much a check. And our community, I think, unfortunately, um, a lot of people don't want to exert their rights, because they don't want to seem like they have something to hide. It's very different from the cultures or the legal systems that they grew up in. Back home, maybe they can't say no when police show up, right? But here you can, so do it.
Yeah. Thank you, Adam, for that. There's a follow-up question to this very briefly, and then there's another question around airport and detainment at the airport. So the question is, why is law enforcement allowed to lie to the community? What's the reasoning behind it? I guess it's a long legal probably answer, but just briefly, if you have anything to say on that.
I don't know why necessarily, or I guess like the why, so I don't know the reasoning behind the why, but why? Because courts have allowed it, right? People have challenged it, and the courts have said no, like law enforcement can. That's part of their tools that they can use, right? They could say, oh, someone said that you did this. And then sometimes the person's like, what? Why did that person tell on me, right? And like that does law enforcement's job for them, even the person was denying it the whole time, right? So it is one of the tools that they use to gather information.
Yeah, thank you. The next question is, what recommendations do you have for people who may be detained during re-entering the country after travel? Do people have to answer questions, have to answer all of the questions? Can you be like, I don't want to answer this question? And the other question is, how long are they allowed to detain people? Is there a limit to that? When should people start to be alarmed and all of that?
Okay.
And I guess if we can answer this on modality for citizens and non-citizens, maybe that would be helpful as well.
Yes. All right. So yeah, for people who are detained during re-entering the trip, right? For U.S. citizens, you have to answer questions about your identification and your travels. So, right, if they're asking like, is this you or something like that, or what's your name? Providing the passport. If they're asking questions like if you used another name before and they ask, is this you? Like you have to answer those questions that relate to your identity and identification. And then if they're asking where you traveled to, like who you visited when you traveled and things like that, those are questions you have to answer. So for US citizens, right, anything beyond those, if they start to say, oh, are you Sunni or Shia? Like that's none of their business. So in a situation like that, say for US citizens, they say like, I know I have to answer questions regarding my identification and my travels. I'm not going to answer any other questions. I'm not going to answer questions about my religious beliefs, my political beliefs, or anything like that. Right. So for US citizens, I would keep reiterating that. I'm only going to answer questions related to my identification and to my travels. I'm not going to answer any other questions. So with that, what will happen? Either they'll be like, okay, this person knows their rights. We can do this, thing for a couple hours, or we can just let them go now. So one of the options is they just let you go now. The other option is it makes them mad that you're not just giving them the information that they want. So then they're like, okay, we're going to keep you for a while. There is no concrete set time for how long they can keep you, right? It has to be a reasonable period. Reasonableness depends on the circumstances, right? If they have to, if it takes them 4 hours to like match identifications or things like that, theoretically, then that would be a reasonable amount of time. We've seen people, close to 10 hours. 10 hours, I think, is grounds for a legal case, right? That seems beyond. But generally what we're seeing is like 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours, even up to 6, 7. Those are probably those could be justified by the government as reasonable time periods, right? So if you cooperate, they might, or if you don't cooperate, they might just let you go because you're not cooperating and like your rights, or they might try to make your life difficult and keep you for hours and just keep questioning you. Now non-citizens, like you have to answer, I think, pretty much all of the questions that they ask. They want to see your social media, like you have to show them your social media. If you don't show them the social media, right, the person right then and there can deny your entry, into the United States. Right, it doesn't seem fair, it doesn't seem right. But as of right now, that's where things stand. The legal system moves slow, right? So right? People have been battling these things, right, since Trump took office. We don't have clear rulings on anything yet. Usually there's just like minor procedural rulings that allow a case to go forward or, that maybe, lifts a temporary restraining order that limits a certain action, but like the merits are still haven't been decided yet. So we're in this like limbo of doesn't seem right, doesn't seem legal, but the courts haven't said it's illegal yet.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much, Adam. There are a few questions, and Christine, perhaps you will also have insight into these in Pittsburgh around like, ICE operations. I think there is a question around like, whether there is like, information about certain type of activity in Pittsburgh. Mr. Christine, I don't know if you would like to answer that. And
Yeah.
like, yeah.
Sure. So, yeah, the question was about our ICE toolkit, if there was a live tracker on there for activity in the area concerning ICE. There is not. However, on the toolkit, there is information on how to locate somebody if you thought they were detained. And then there is a hotline number. Casa San Jose has an emergency response team to where if you were in a current situation, witnessing a situation, you could call that number. And they have it set up to about a under 15-minute response time to have somebody there to help record, gather information, and add some protection for the person who ICE is, going after. There are chat groups in Signal, WhatsApp, and various places that I have seen, even messaging across Facebook, people saying, hey, there's ice at Carnegie right now, or, it's icing outside, and using loosely keyed words to let you know that it is happening in certain areas of the town. And I have noticed that through our community, in some of the groups, it goes pretty quick, pretty far, pretty wide. So keep an eye on groups, and if you need to locate somebody, the link is on the ICE toolkit. But as far as a live tracker of where and what ICE is doing, we do not have that.
Thank you, Sir Christine. I see a question under the Q&A portion. I think like this is about like specific activity in Pittsburgh area, and the question is because they are also like detaining people who have long held like employment cards, and as such, the question is it advisable to stay at home until some of this passes? And I think that's a difficult question to answer, and it depends on everyone's specific situations. But yeah, I think like, one important principle is that at the end of the day, right, so we keep each other safe, our communities keep each other safe, and there are ways to show up in these spaces. If there's anybody who would like to ask a question on audio, if you use the raise your hand function, I'm happy to unmute you if that is your preference. And I'm gonna stop the screen share for a little bit so that I can have a little bit more control over here in terms of seeing that function. All right. And there's a question around like whether it's legal for the government to take a prolonged time for a work authorization renewal or not in the meantime.
Generally, it is legal for right most immigration stuff, right? It's like discretionary and the government, has deference. Now there are certain situations, sometimes if you submit a writ of mandamus or something like that, filing like a court case against the government, um, sometimes people will do that to maybe accelerate the review, but legally at the end, the court's not going to say, oh, the government has to grant this, in this amount of time. But there are some legal mechanisms, like right once you file it, maybe it will bring it onto their radar, like, oh, this case, we have a court case in this. If you approve it, the court case just goes away. So then they don't have to deal with the case. And so that is an option, but generally the government can take the time that they need. And especially now, right, they're re-reviewing everything. Um, um, so yeah, things being changed to no updates. I think there's going to be a lot of that, right? And yeah, it is extremely upsetting for people that want to work, and people who, right, even with asylum, once you apply for asylum after 6 months, like you can get the work authorization and stuff like that, right? People have been waiting for that. Now that kind of goes in limbo.
Yeah. Okay, so with that, I think there is as we get close to wrapping up, I want to remind everybody of one thing, which is how can all of us show up in this space? What can we do, right? So we here in our area have been working to pass what we call welcoming city, welcoming county policies, right? So which limits local law enforcement's cooperation with ICE. It limits how county prisons and as such can sort of go out of their boundaries to work with ICE and criminalize our communities. There is definitely steps that at the state level, the governor's office, like Governor Shapiro, can take, and broader coalitions like Pennsylvania Immigration Coalition also has been addressing these issues as well. So I want to encourage everyone to look for these resources. Some of it is on our social media, some of it is in our partner social media work and other websites. So we would love for you to perhaps also get some links here. I will drop in the chat Pennsylvania Immigration Coalition's both ICE resistance resources as well as rapid response information. So that everyone can hopefully be informed about these, as well as some of the steps that we are all asking everyone to show up importantly in these work, right? So once again, a reminder for all of us is that the injustices of ICE and other agencies or out of law practice of FBI is not just a function of this government, this administration. It's been always there, but that we need to be mindful, and we need to be mindful of our rights, and we need to be mindful of the fact that we should show up for our own communities. There are different ways to do that. Just today, I was in a meeting with an imam from San Diego, right? So who has been going to the court and talking to people who are waiting to receive information from an immigration court, what we call accompaniment. And sometimes ICE agents that are there, when they see religious leaders standing there, they decide not to do an arrest over there. Maybe they are still targeting people, but there are ways that our religious leaders, everyday community members, all of us can show up importantly in this work. Thank you, Christine, for dropping the link to the ICE toolkit from CAIR-Pittsburgh. Our chapters, our websites are also at your service. If you can, please, just report and also make sure that you engage with our work. I want to invite Sister Christine. Any closing remarks from you, and then Adam from you, and then we can wrap our call at that time, inshallah.
Sure. I would just like to, for the Pittsburgh area and those on our side that would deal with the CAIR-Pittsburgh office, to know that there are no dumb questions. There are no dumb concerns. If you have any questions, you have any concerns, even if you think it's not significant around these areas and knowing your rights, please just reach out to us so we can offer you the support and the resources and the help that you need. So don't ever feel like it's, it's something minute, or trust Google, right? Come to us. Let us see if we can assist you and give you the best that you can. And if you see something, say something. If you see a particular community being attacked by ICE, or you notice an upkick, let people within the community know. Let's come together to help, keep us safe and gain as much knowledge and resources as possible. And thank you for coming.
Thank you, Sister Christine. Jazakallah khair. Adam.
Yeah, just I hope I hope it's like not too negative. It's not really an optimistic time though, just trying to be blunt with like the reality of the situation, and right, contact us if anything comes up, because if we can't help, right, we can connect you with attorneys that can help, or organizations that can help, right? If it's a free speech issue, right, we partner with the ACLU. Maybe they would have more expertise on something, right? So just exercise your rights to the fullest, and contact us. We can connect you with who you need to be connected with, inshallah.
All right. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining, for your questions. And hopefully we'll continue to reach out to you. Thank you so much, Sam. Have a good night, inshallah.
Assalamu alaikum.
Salam. Thank you.